You mentioned Casey Thompson with him.
Mhm.
I'll be the first one to admit, I've brought this up on a number of different shows here. The second we hired Whipple, I immediately thought we were going away from the dual threat QB. That was my first thought, just knowing, the history there with him. I thought we're going to get drop back guys. That's not the game I love. I love dual threat guys. It's one of the things I liked about Martinez. I didn't like the mistakes, but I like the dual threat feature to it. To bring in Casey Thompson, to bring in Chuba Purdy, to go out and now we've recruited Watson on top of that. I mean, we're bringing in guys that the mobility part of the game can still be there. But to your point, we need to be able to run the ball. And I think of the end of that Tennessee game last year, Pitt at Tennessee, the last drive, they got in the I formation. They ran the clock out. They got a couple of first downs just running the ball. Do you think we hear about this marriage of the best of what Frost brought with the offense, the running game, with the best of what Whipple brings, the pass game? Do you see that? Can that come together and really truly marry into this really interesting pro style offense with a mobile QB that can get under center? How do you see that kind of coming together?
Well, I would prefer not to have fusion cooking. I would just say let Whipple run it. Let Frost be the CEO that he said he wanted to be when he had those meetings, right? He meets with Trev. He says, I want to be the CEO. I want to be the grandmaster over everything. Let Whipple do it. I don't want to see Frost trying to get his offense or whatever. I think it's been proven, if you just look at the overall numbers, what they did at Oregon. It's not sustainable in the Big Ten, not without supreme talent. You have to go against Pac-12 defenses. Big Ten defenses are just better. The weather changes. You have more windy days. You have all kinds of problems where you can't necessarily do the same things you did at Oregon, right? I know you did them back at New Hampshire. I know way back then that Chip Kelly did them there, but I don't think you can do it that way. And so let me just have what Whipple does. Just let Whipple run it. Get some input from his offensive coaches about which players need to be in. That's one of the things that they've really struggled. And part of this, I think, was the coaches. They didn't have a good rotation of players. There were so many times where you'd be watching a game and you think to yourself, okay, pull that guy. Or why isn't this guy played? Or he had a couple of plays and they hadn't played in a while. It was almost like they forgot, You got to have that. You have all these extra assistants, the assistant to the assistant to the assistant. Those guys need to be, hey, Applewhite, or whoever, send this running back in because he was hot a couple of runs ago, or this guy's had a couple of runs and now he's winded. They need somebody like that. For whatever reason, the rotation of players.
That game last year against Purdue, Yant having 4 carries for like 50 yards in the first half.
Yeah.
And I sent out a tweet at halftime. It was a joking tweet. Like, how many carries will he get in the second half? 10, 20, 30, or 40, right? It was it was such a no-brainer that he's running so well, getting 10 plus yards a carry. And he gets 2 carries in the second half. And we've seen that with the wide receiver room at times too, where, Betts will have a huge game and the next game you don't see him for 2 more. And that kind of consistency at some of those spots.
Michael, do you get the sense or the feel at all of the relationship between Frost and Whipple? Is Frost relinquishing that kind of control, or do you have any kind of feel for that situation?
I hope so. I mean, he said all the right things about having a guy who's experienced and allowing him to do other things and get more involved in special teams. And hopefully he's serious about that. I don't know. My biggest concern out of this whole thing, because I remember earlier I tweeted that I thought they had more talent at these positions, and I think the overall coaching staff is better. I think the quarterback they have in there, either one of those quarterbacks, I think will do a better job late in games than Martinez did, which was the biggest issue he had. My biggest concern is, will Scott Frost not tamper and mess things up? I really believe that that's been an issue. I think he has too many times either lost his way in a game. I'll never forget that shot. We had this great shot against Michigan State of the sideline on that punt. And your head coach, his head was buried in the sheet or whatever, and he didn't even see the punt go off. He didn't even see the alignment. If he was looking up, because trust me, there were people in my house, call timeout. The alignment was bad. You could see it on TV. We talked about it on Big Red Overreaction right after it. The alignment was bad. It was just, if you're going to have a right-footed kicker, you got to have protection to his foot side. If you have a left-footed kicker, you got to have protection. And they didn't. I think the head coach sees that and he calls a timeout. But the head coach was too busy looking ahead to be the offensive coordinator. And so I hope he lets Whipple do everything and start managing the game, and don't make the mistakes that caused this team to lose.
Well, and that's something, we joke about Mac is back on the show a couple of times now. He kind of quit after the Illinois game. We went down to Champaign last year.
And 4 years.
I did too, bro. I did too.
I was just like, no way.
I talked my boy into going too, and he paid like $400 for tickets, and
I was joking. As the team got worse, my yard got greener. I'm like, I'm just gonna spend more time out in the yard.
But that game, and Rob went with us too on this one, and that game was the worst of the worst across the board. And one of the things was one of the same things you just mentioned there. Hey, Whipple has this experienced offensive coordinator. Well, so was Lubick, right? Lubick was a OC at Power 5 levels, and all offseason, to your point about the concern you have is Frost going to take it over. Mm-hmm. We came out against Illinois, and when we couldn't adjust to the 4-man front, and he basically takes the headphones back, and we're driving back to Peoria, and we're listening to the post game. Yeah, and I heard him say that live, and I was like, "Oh, don't say that! Don't say that! That's not coming off."
And then Lubick contradicted him on Monday.
Oh yeah.
Then Lubick came back and goes, no, we had, or Tuesday, excuse me. He goes, no, we were fine.
And we had Coach Osborne on a month ago. And to talk to Coach Osborne, and the words he used was institutional knowledge, to have a staff of guys where you could be sitting there in 1992 going against Oklahoma State, and they line up in something weird, and they could sit there and go, hey, do you remember when Missouri did this against us in 1978? Yeah. And Tenneper would say, yeah, this is how we adjusted. And they would adjust like that. I mean, we're not going to get that out of this staff this year. Don't get me wrong. But it needs to be better than, hey, they came out in a 4-man front.
Talk to those old guys, right? Mm-hmm. North Texas game. They came out in this like 2-man front where they were off the ball by like a yard and a half. And I remember talking to Charlie McBride about it. Mm-hmm. And they were trying to help the offense because they couldn't figure out how to handle this pass rush. Texas Tech had done it in like a year previous. And they had the talk at halftime. They adjusted, and then they, took over in the second half. But it is about knowledge.
Hey, Rob, and now's a good time. I think we've had this is a good break time. We've had a number of questions come in. Stuff. What do we got?
Well, one of them was already answered. It was Jim in Minnesota. He wanted to know about merging the concepts before Dublin between Whipple and Frost. So I think we covered that, and we don't need to go over that anymore.
Okay.
And then the other two comments, one is just thanks for having Sever on, takes on the 2022 roster. And I really like his takes so far because let's be honest, they're pretty much right in line with mine where I feel like there's been a lot of improvement. So I like to hear the pros say the same thing that this amateur is saying. And then great to have you back, Mac. Kool-Aid is delicious this time of year. Let me tell you, I have been feeding Mac the Kool-Aid. I know Honky's been feeding it to him too. I mean, he listens to the show, I think, so hopefully it's feeding him. So,
Well,